Within this video, we will show you how to use a connector package. Probably you've heard of the term connector package within Alumio before. This is where we have a very easy and seamless connection towards any of the platforms that you would like to connect to. For these, we would have to create a template in which you can simply say, okay, I have, for example, in this case, a Shopify connector package, and there is the full API already explained in there. So I can very simply just say, you can very simply say, I want to connect to a specific endpoint. And this endpoint is just searchable, saying like, okay, I want something with customers. And then it just shows me all of the customer endpoints that are within Shopify. In this case, we are using Shopify connector package, but this would work the same or in a very similar style for all of the other connector packages that we have as well. So if you understand one, you would also understand any of them. And that is also the way that we want to approach it, that if you understand one concept, that it also works for all of the other systems that you would like to connect to. So in this case, I'm going to retrieve a list of products from Shopware. Below that, we also see the request parameters. And there's always 3 parameters that you would have to include with that, which is the path, the query, and the payload. So allow me to explain you how that looks like and what they are used for. So let's look at the following example. Let's say that this is our URL to get a certain information from all customers. But what if there is a specific customer, for example, a customer 1? Then that is something we can use within the path of saying like, okay, we want to put that path towards this here. So that would be written like this as an ID. So in this case, we would have to change the path from an array towards an object and then say like, okay, our ID, and we have the ID of 1. So in this case, that is how we would use the path. What we say behind that, there's also a certain API key or API token. So let's say API key, and our API key is QWE123. Then that is something that we would put in the query. So that would be, okay, we put our API key, and we put that as the QWE123. Also, let's say that there are more than one keys for the path. So for example, within the customers, there is a specific customer that has contacts. And those contacts then also have a specific ID because there could be more contacts within one customer. And we can also write that as here for a extra object being the contact underscore ID. And then, for example, that contact ID would be 123. We have to put a comma here, and that is how that would look like. The case of payload is if you want to post data in the body towards that system. So in this case, since we're doing a get, that's not really necessary, but the payload is something we will get back to once we do the outgoing configuration and therefore, of course, do a post message towards a system. So in this case, for the first example, we don't have to put anything there because we actually have to retrieve a list. And within the list, we don't put any queries or pathing or anything like that. We just want to retrieve a list of products. So in this case, we only have to define, of course, the client towards the system. So where's the system located? What kind of authentication is needed? And anything like that. So once we save that, we would run the income configuration. We can view the information from here. So once we view the logging, we can see that we get a GET request from the products. We will also see that we get a certain response. And within that response, we get all of the products that are currently in the Shopify environment that I have as a dummy environment set up right now. So we only have 3 products in there, and we get a list of those 3 products. And then you can do anything with those products that you would like. Would you say like, okay, we don't want to get a list of products, but we want to get a product by an ID or a single product? We could say like, okay, in this case, we would have to provide the products ID, and we have to provide the ID itself. So I just copied the ID that came from the call that we just made. Of course, you might not be entirely sure, like, okay, what do I specifically need? Is this a product ID? Is this an ID? Or is it product ID written like this? In this case, we always take the same way of writing that the documentation of this specific software also does. Documentation is also mentioned here below that. So if we zoom into this one specifically, we can zoom into the products. In this case, we are talking with a product, and we would like to get a singular product of this, and in which you can see we have the product underscore ID. So let's say we use that in the correct way, underscore ID, and we save that, and we run the incoming configuration once more. We once again see that the subscriber has been consumed. So once again, we will see the logs. And in this case, we see that we do a call towards product / and then the ID of the product. And in this case, we only get that one product that we wanted to receive that way. So this is how you can retrieve and use any of the subscribers of any of the connector packages. Now we will go into the outgoing configuration and use the subscriber package for the publisher. Here we will show you the connector package towards an outgoing configuration, which works slightly different than for the income configuration. But again, once you understand it for one of the platforms, it also works for all of the other platforms. So in this case, once again, showing a Shopify connector package. That is in this case the publisher, which of course is the counterpart of the subscriber. In this case, rather than just having the option of pulling information, we have the information of creating, updating, and deleting, similarly as the way that is the post, the update, or the post and the delete methods for the HTTP request. In this case, we would also have to define the HTTP client, and we would have to find something to get this query, path, and payload once again, because we need that for every of those connector packages. So to show, for this case, we are connected for this outgoing configuration towards this route of the routes getting products from Akinio to a Shopify environment, in which we also already have a task set up of saying like, okay, this is our task that we want to pull through the system, where we have data of a product, and a product has a simple title, and that's all there is towards that product. If we go to the Shopify environment, we see that that product is not been made yet. And once we go to the outgoing configuration, from here we can actually see how does it look like to prepare the data for a connector package like this. Similarly, and very similar as the incoming configuration, we would have to define the path, a query, and a payload. In the case that you're not using them, just put them as an empty array, and that's the easiest way. However, the system still needs those variables to be working. In this case, since we're talking to an endpoint that doesn't have any path or any query, we don't need to fill those in, but we do need the payload, because in the payload, we actually have to put the information of the product that we want to send towards Shopify in this case. I can also test how that would look like based on the data that I got from the entity transformer, seeing how that would look like that I say, okay, I have my path, I have my query, and I have the payload, and within the payload, I have the product that I would like to send towards Shopify. So that is all there is to it. Nothing more, very easy. And we can say like, okay, we want to now run the route. Once we run the route, we see that the publish has been exported, and we can actually view the information within the task itself. If we refresh this page, we can see that we have a finished task right now, and we can see that we sent a request towards the products.json with a specific payload of the product itself, and then we get a response from Shopify saying, okay, we created a product with this specific title. We can also verify that over here if we refresh the Shopify page in this case, in which we can see that we created a product made by an API call. And that is how easy it is to use the connector package, both for the incoming configuration as well as the outgoing configuration, and what kind of steps you would have to define to use those.